What's cooking, everybody? Dave Altizer here with Kinotika. Today we're talking about the top 10 things to know about the new Sony RX100 VI. We are going to be doing a full featured review on this channel about the Sony RX100 VI, but just to get us started here, we're going to talk about the top 10 things to know about this camera. The first thing to know about the RX100 VI is the amazing burst rate. You can hold the trigger down for about 10 to 15 seconds, give or take, and the camera will take 24 frames per second. Once you take all those images, the camera does have to buffer and write those images to the card, which roughly takes about a minute for 100 images, for example. But it's really amazing because there's actually no blackout on the screen as you're taking those images, and it really ensures that you're gonna get the shot. The second thing to know about the RX100 VI is the autofocus performance is amazing. We get eye detect face tracking. This camera has 315 autofocus points, and it can nail that focus within 0.03 seconds. You also have the ability to touch focus using the touch screen finally, and that also includes when you're using the EVF on the side here. Once you're looking into the EVF, you just take your thumb and you can actually control the autofocus points using the touch screen. It's really intuitive. The autofocus is fast, it's accurate, and really powerful. The autofocus on this camera is thumbs up. The third thing to know about the RX100 VI is we get that beloved My Menu section. Sony has gotten a bad reputation for their menu structure, and it wasn't until the newer models like the A7R III and the A7 III that we started seeing the ability to have a fully customizable menu section. We have that here with the RX100 VI, and it's great. The fourth thing to know about this camera is kind of its big selling feature, the zoom range. We have a 24mm to 200mm zoom, optical zoom that is, on the RX100 VI. On the 24mm end, it is f2.8, but as soon as you start zooming in, the aperture starts to go down and down. When you reach 200mm, you get to 4.5, unfortunately. The fifth thing to know about the RX100 VI is about the video record limit. Now, this isn't a positive thing to know about this camera, but I do think it's something that you need to know. This camera is capable of 4K, and I will say the 4K looks really good. It's sharp. You have 100 megabits per second maximum. You can record 24 and 30 frames per second, but there's a big caveat with the 4K recording. You only have 5 minutes to record in 4K. It's not that big of a problem. At the end of the day, all you gotta do is push record again and it'll just pick up where it left off and you can keep going, but it's just something to consider. As soon as you switch to 1080p mode, however, we have a 30-minute record limit. So if you're doing a longer form recording, you're gonna have to switch to 1080p. The sixth thing to know about the RX100 VI is the slow motion features. All of the RX100 cameras for the last couple of years have had super slow-mo features, and this camera continues that tradition with up to 960 frames per second in 1080p. Now, the 960 frames per second mode is not very usable in my opinion. I would advise you to stick with 240 frames per second. That is the best quality for super slow-mo on this camera. You can shoot at 120 frames per second in full auto mode with autofocus and everything. You just have to slow it down in post-production, but you can shoot in 240 frames per second. It looks clean. The only caveat with that is it locks your focus as soon as you hit go. So there's no autofocus, there's no tracking, there's no auto mode. You basically set all that up and then you hit record. The camera doesn't adjust anything for you, it just stays locked. But once you learn how to work around that feature, the slow-mo on this camera is pretty impressive. The seventh thing to know about this camera is that you can charge this thing over USB. I wish every single camera manufacturer would include this on all their cameras. The battery life, it's not the best. You get about an hour of battery life when you're taking stills, and I would imagine that when you shoot video, it's even less than that. Definitely pick up some extra batteries, and definitely have a little handy iPhone charger with you so that you can plug it in over the USB and charge it using an external battery power solution. The eighth thing that I want you guys to know about the RX100 VI is actually three negative things. One, we lost the ND filter that was in the previous model. This camera does not have ND built in. Two, there is still no mic input on this camera. All of these cameras have always been no mic input. mic only internally. I wish so badly that Sony would allow us to plug in a mic. And the third thing of number 8, that I want you to know is that the body is kind of slippery. It's hard to hold. It feels fragile. If you don't have the hand strap from Sony on here, if you're not using an extender grip or a cage or something like that, it's just really hard to hold. The ninth thing to know about this camera is my favorite feature of this camera, and that is something that you might not have heard about. Hybrid log gamma. This camera has HLG or HDR or Rec 2020, whatever you want to call it. They're calling it hybrid log gamma, and I am just now kind of figuring out what that is and how powerful it can actually be. It's really exciting because HLG is kind of the closest thing that I've ever seen to shooting raw video, but not shooting raw video. It somehow saves all that information of the highlights and the shadows and makes it super easy to color correct and change your settings in post-production. And the 10th, and the 10th thing to know about this camera is its price. This camera is a little expensive for what it is. In my opinion, if this camera costed $500, $700, it would be a steal. This camera costs $1,200. For $1,200, you can get a much better camera with better features, larger sensors, interchangeable lenses, and a mic input for video shooters. And because it's so expensive, I can't recommend it for everybody. Anyways, that does it for our top 10 things to know about the Sony RX100 VI. I think overall, this camera is very impressive, and I'm excited to do a more detailed review on this camera on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you found it helpful, give us a thumbs up. Once again, I'm Dave Altizer. This is Kinotika. See you next time.